Welcome to the Two Blokes Chatting radio show on 94.7 The Pulse. Music, interviews, news and, well, Two Blokes Chatting. Now, here are the two blokes.
Now, I'm going to read some stats out, Rob, and then you can introduce the great man who we have on the telephone. He played 116 games of footy, kicked 89 goals, he possessed the ball 1,947 times.
Goodness gracious.
And in that 116 games, scored a very impressive 36 Brownlow votes. Who have we got?
We have got a man whose name has been confused with someone over the years for many years. He is John Newnham. The other one is a buffhead known as Sam. But we've got the good one. Johnny Newnham, good morning.
Good morning, Rob.
Great to have you aboard, my friend. It's a pleasure. I've been wanting to get you on for a chat for a long time. One of the lesser lights, having the fact that you played with Fitzroy that didn't win many games between 1964 and 1971, but I know from a couple of your old opponents that you were better than handy at this game, and sometimes people like you get lost in the AFL system, but it's nice to have you on to tell you a story. Tell us where it all started. A little boy from the suburbs of Melbourne. How'd you get to Fitzroy?
Oh, well, I was played with the school team at Carey Grammar, went to Ivanhoe Amateurs, and then was recruited from there to Fitzroy in about 1963, thereabouts, 1962. So started there.
How did recruiting for a VFL team happen in those days? Did you just get these people come up in trench coats and ties and slipping you a few dollars, or patting you on the back and telling you how good? How did it all work in those days?
Well, it was just they had scouts out. There was a fellow called Billy Deans who used to play back pocket for Melbourne, and originally I was asked to go down and play with Melbourne as a result of his contact was still with the Melbourne Football Club, but Fitzroy heard something about it, and then I had a couple of calls from Fitzroy to come down and try out there. So, yeah.
John, it's Neil Butler here, and I am the tragic who is the Fitzroy. 38 years in a row I've been a member of that mighty organisation. I can remember you running around in the number 20, am I right?
That's right.
Yep, I was, although I think some of your early days you played number 39 according to my research.
I did play 39 when I first went down and played a year or so in the seconds, and 39 was my number, but I took over from Graham Campbell's old number 20, I think.
Well, that's a bit of royalty at Fitzroy.
Famous.
He was. He certainly was. He was a very good player.
He was a night premiership coach too in 1978. He coached the Lions to a premiership out at Waverley on a very, very wet night against North Melbourne, as I recall. So you obviously would have played with and against, I suspect, my childhood hero, a fellow who played a few games, a guy called Kevin Murray. You would have played against him in the state games when you played, because you represented Victoria, obviously, yourself, when he would have been with WA.
He was with WA at the time. I just forget who he was coaching. I think it must have been East Perth.
Yeah, the Royals. Yeah.
Yes, that's right.
And
yes, I played a lot of games with him. I roomed with him in one of the stateside. In fact, it was the year that he won the Brownlow medal, and he and I were, as they did then, we shared rooms. So there's quite a lot of chat, and I got to know Kevin pretty well. But yes, he was an extremely good footballer, and I still keep in touch with him. As a matter of fact, he's a little bit older than me, but he's still going along all right.
You know, I caught up with him at a family day a couple of weeks ago, and he's still the Lions had a family day at Royal Park the other day, and all the players were there. Literally every player was there, and the queue that was lined up to meet each player, there was one queue that was about 4 times the length of the other. My sister stood in a queue for an hour and 10 minutes to have her photo taken with the great man. So.
Yes. Well, he would have had his Brownlow medal round his neck, I presume, at the time.
He did. The offer was made for me to wear it, but that would be a bit like the Pope saying, would you like to wear my hat? I just couldn't do it. A lot of people do, but I just couldn't do it. So there were some bullying times, obviously. I was a Fitzroy supporter growing up. You know, I was born in 62, so the years that you were playing, I remember you playing, I would have said it, I probably saw you really early days at Brunswick Street, then at Princes Park, then probably a season or two at the Junction.
At the junction, that's right.
Yeah, and
Where I left, and when was pretty much when Graham Donaldson came to the club to coach and took over from Billy, I think it was Billy Stevens, who I saw the other day, as a matter of fact.
yeah, it was his birthday the other day. He's 92.
92, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I spoke to him the other day, and he's still got a lot to offer. He's a terrific bloke, Bill.
John, how tough was it in those days? You played against some wonderful players from clubs that were strong and had really strong bases and supporters and homes to go to, whereas you, through your brief career of 116 games, had 3 different home grounds that you played at. How tough was it for you as a group to keep solid and united in those times?
Oh, look, I think probably the team that was around us, you know, I mentioned Billy Stevens, or we talked about Billy Stevens just a minute ago, and he was a great man for keeping us all together. I would put a lot down to him. There was people like Ernie Josephs who had rescued the club at the time, Harry Meese, and we had some pretty good guys, you know, out, not actually running onto the ground, but who were trying to look after us. And they were pretty difficult times. And of course, being down the bottom of the ladder there somewhere, it was quite difficult. There was no draft or anything like that, and so there was certainly no trying to equalise the competition as they've done in recent times.
But that's why you and I have got such strong resilience skills, John. And I was just looking at this book that I've got. It's a ripping book, and if you would sign it for me, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah, that'd be good.
It talks about your first game, and it talks about your last game, and ironically, both at the same ground, but not your home ground, both at Glenferrie Oval.
My last game...
It says here...
The Fitzroy Bibles can't be...
Yeah, no, round
no,
two...
No, couldn't be out. I've lost that. I couldn't tell you. My first game was at Glenferrie, yes.
Yep. And interestingly, and coincidentally, both of them were 8-goal losses against Hawthorn.
That was probably the difference between Peter Hudson kicking his usual...
42 goals against us.
Actually, probably low for him, but 8 goals, that's right.
Yeah.
One of the things that astounded me, having met you and a very good friend of yours, and it's been a privilege to meet you both, John Bird. I rang John this morning to let him know that you were going to be on the radio, so hopefully he's listening, and good morning to you, John, if you are.
It's an outbreak of John's.
Good morning to you, Johnny, yeah.
Yeah, and but you're both telling me the story about how the friendship developed around the footy, and when Fitzroy played Essendon, you two would occasionally, one would pick the other up to go to the football. That's just astounding.
Yes, it is, and it was when I think back, just how unusual was it. I remember Johnny saying that he would come over and pick me up. I think I may have invited, or we may have, Pam and I may have invited Johnny and his wife to come over and have dinner with us after the game, and so I think at that time Pam was picked up by Johnny's wife, Karen, and then Johnny, he picked me up, and then we came home and shared a bit of fun together. Actually, I think that day we both played pretty well, although it was pretty difficult to get to play well against Johnny. He was another great footballer too.
Well, he was one of many. The fact that Bobby Skilton, who's probably like yourself, played in a side that didn't win very often, but one of the most decorated, if not the most decorated footballer in history. But there were so many others. There was Aylets and Gallagher's and Goggins. The list goes on and on and on of great players that you had to line up on every week.
Smith.
Ross Smith,
yes. Yeah, Ross Smith was another one I was going to say. And of course, early days, Peter Crimmins.
Yep.
And he playing for Hawthorn there. That was always a tough game, but...
well, in 71 you would have played against Lethal Lee too, I would have thought.
I did play against Lethal Lee, although I used to try and stay a bit clear of him.
Didn't have much of a sense of humour in those days, did he, the great man?
Where he was, I used to go and change at the forward pocket.
Hey, there's nothing wrong with that if it makes sense. I reckon that's fine. So obviously, John, in those days, if we've got young people listening, they're thinking this bloke, played 100 games of what we would now call AFL football. He's represented his state in what in those days was the best 21 players in the state, regardless where they came from. So you could obviously play a bit, and yet presumably you'd go to training 2 or 3 nights a week and hold down a full-time job the rest of the time. What was your job outside of footy?
Oh, well, I went into a family business building building trucks and bus bodies, and of course in those days it was just our sport, and you never planned to get there. It sort of evolved, I guess, and you found yourself there, and it was when I think back, it seemed like a bit of a dream, but certainly there was the fact that you had to get and have a full-time job. I had a family and a couple of kids at the time, or not at the time, but then, and they were about. So I had to make sure that I held a position in the family business as well as playing football. Did make me a little bit of a more hungry player, though. I guess certainly I went there as an amateur, and I agreed to stay as an amateur when I first went there. But after a while, I thought, oh, well, it's just silly, that money sitting there, which had accumulated, and I took it to help along the cause of the home finances.
Well, I reckon you should be telling people you're a professional bodybuilder. We just don't tell them it was bus bodies.
That's right.
Johnny, speaking of hungry, you weren't as hungry as the bloke that you chased around at the MCG in 1970 when the Queen came down to watch a game of Aussie rules footy, and you had the privilege of meeting her. And I know it embarrasses you every time I ask to bring the photo out when I come to your place, but it must still be an extraordinary moment in your life to have the privilege of meeting Her Majesty on the MCG and then entertaining her with our great Australian game and beating Richmond to boot.
Right.
Yes. Look, it was a great day, and again, it not something I thought a lot about until later on. I thought, well, perhaps that was all right. It was a great day, and in fact, just recently, a couple of people have contacted me. Apparently, there was some article there somewhere about the best players on the ground. Or in the ground, and I can tell you for sure I wasn't. But there were other players who were playing very, very well. But it was a great day, and of course, not only did we meet the Queen, but we met Doc Whitlam at the Richmond rooms afterwards. We went across to the Richmond rooms, and as they did in those days, the two teams used to get together and have a bit of a party and a few beers and what have you. So it was a terrific day. I was a little bit disappointed that I hadn't worn clean shoes for my mother. She in all the photos noticed that I had the dirtiest Adidas shoe. But
the only one that had done any work, that's what it was. I'd be selling that option.
Well, that's why I used to nugget them so that they could, because they used to count your kicks then. I suppose they still do now, but they used to count your kicks and I came off the ground. Well, they couldn't tell you whether you'd had a few or you had none. If you went out with black boots. So she was pretty upset being a royalist.
Johnny, thank you so much for joining us. It is still my wish to have you and John Burt in this studio together one day when times are better, and I'll put that on your radar. It is going to happen. I promise.
I'll be there.
We'll get that. We'll get that on the go one day. So thanks for your time this morning. I look forward to seeing you, albeit briefly and from a distance this afternoon, but if you could sign that book for Neil, that would be fantastic.
An absolute thrill, John.
Thanks very much, Neil. Thanks, Rob.
Yeah, good on you, mate. All the very best.
See you later. All the best. Bye.
Johnny Newnham, a great man and clearly a very good player because his record suggests so. And it's a shame there's so many like him that played in those teams that didn't see much finals action. And I guess the very best players tend to have either a Brownlow medal or a great finals record to elevate them into the legend status. But there's a lot that could play the game well and don't get much notoriety, and he's clearly one of them.